Well, folks, the media have a brand new, terrible argument. Their argument is that when Israel trades terrorists for innocent Israeli civilians, that's because the innocent Israeli civilians and the terrorists basically the same. Over the weekend, there's been this series of massive hostage exchanges between Hamas and Israel. So this weekend saw Hamas release some of the 240 hostages that the terror group took during its mass killing spree on October 7th. They released 13 Israeli hostages the first day. That was Friday. 13 more hostages on Saturday. 17 hostages on Sunday, bringing the current total to 43 hostages. Under the current break-in operations, Hamas was set to release 50 total hostages. The deal could be extended by 1 day for every 10 more hostages released. So why did the deal happen in the first place? Well, on Israel's side, the reason is pretty obvious. Israel values the life of its citizens in a way that Hamas simply does not. In fact, Israel is willing to put its own soldiers at additional risk in order to achieve the return of civilians. And by the way, even in order to protect Palestinian civilians, many of whom participated in the October 7th attacks. Because, again, reminder, Israel has complete air superiority over Gaza. They could bomb the place into total submission if Israel wanted to do so. So for Israel, the deal was painful but clear. Try to get out as many hostages as possible, even if Hamas would be temporarily strengthened. Meanwhile, what is Hamas looking for? Well, they're looking for a breather. Hamas has been absolutely pummeled. Its leadership class has been largely eliminated. Its operations in northern Gaza have been devastated. Hamas wants a few benefits from the temporary ceasefire. First, a break to regroup, possibly plan new operations. Second, more fuel to enhance the possibility of their survival. And this is the most important one. They want time to try to convince the world that Israel ought to leave them intact, that Israel's campaign against Hamas ought to stop. Again, that last point is the most crucial. Hamas wants the rest of the world to buy the narrative that Hamas is, in fact, a reasonable actor. Or, as we have said, the left-wing notion that Hamas, Israel, they're no different. Underneath, all the same. It's just exploitation. It's just colonization and all the rest. Now, that is a pretty hard sell after you hang glide into Israel and murder nearly 300 people at a music festival. Go house to house to burn babies in their cribs and rape their moms and slaughter civilians at will. Because here's the thing, Hamas didn't even just engage in murder of civilians, they engaged in some of the worst atrocities in modern history. According to one Israeli reserve combat paramedic, this is reported by the Washington Post, he found the corpses of 2 teenage girls in their bedrooms. Quote, one was on a bed. Her arm was dangling from the bed frame. Her legs were bare with bruises. She had a bullet hole in the chest neck area. The other was lying on the floor on her stomach, her legs spread, her pants pulled down toward her knees. There was a liquid on her back that looked like semen. She was shot in the back of the head. According to a volunteer at the Shura military morgue, which was analyzing the bodies of the slain, quote, we saw many women with bloody underwear, broken bones, broken legs, broken pelvises. Another witness described a gang rape at the Nova rave, followed by the murder of the victim. Quote, he didn't pick up his pants. He shot her while inside her. So yeah, it's tough to turn Hamas into Israel's moral equivalent. But the good news for Hamas, they never have to do their own selling. As always, their fellow travelers in the coalition of the oppressed, including their cheerleaders in the legacy media, do it for them. The legacy media have no regrets in their pro-Hamas coverage over the course of the last few weeks. In fact, they admit as much. Here, for example, was the BBC's international editor, claiming that the BBC has been doing a stellar job despite provoking international riots on behalf of Hamas, thanks to lies and false reporting about supposed Israeli human rights violations. Here's the BBC's international editor saying we've done an amazing job.
I've got to ask you about the hospital on the 17th of October.
Al-Akhli, okay. Yeah.
The BBC was criticised heavily for its reporting of that event. Tell us what happened that night and, bluntly, where were you getting your information and do you regret anything that you said that night?
So it broke in, I suppose, mid-evening. And to answer your question, no, I don't regret one thing in my reporting because I think I was measured throughout. I didn't race to judgment.
But you said that building had been flattened.
Oh yeah, well I got that wrong because I was looking at the pictures and what I could see was a square that appeared to be flaming on all sides and there was a sort of a void in the middle and I think it was a picture taken from a drone. And so, we have to piece together what we see.
The media aren't backing down from their pro-Hamas propaganda, not one iota. So even as this hostage deal went through, for example, one LBC reporter, again, British reporter, asked an Israeli spokesperson whether the unevenness of the exchange, remember, here is the exchange. Israel is supposed to get back 50 of its own hostages, and they're releasing 150 terrorists. So that's a 3-to-1 ratio of Israel releasing 3 terrorists for every innocent Israeli. This reporter literally asked the Israeli spokesperson, whether that exchange rate represented Israel's disregard for Palestinian life because it was a 3-for-1 rate.
I was speaking to a hostage negotiator this morning. He made the comparison between the 50 hostages that Hamas has promised to release, as opposed to the 150 prisoners that are Palestinians that Israel has said that it will release. And he made the comparison between the numbers and the fact that does Israel not think that Palestinian lives are valued as highly as Israeli lives?
That is an astonishing accusation. If we could release one prisoner for every one hostage, we would obviously do that. We are operating in horrific circumstances. We're not choosing to release these prisoners who have blood on their hands. We are talking about people who have been convicted of stabbing and shooting attacks. Notice the question of proportionality doesn't interest Palestinian supporters when they are able to get more of their prisoners out. But really, it is outrageous to suggest that the fact that we are willing to release prisoners who are convicted of terrorism offenses, more of them than we are getting our own innocent children back, somehow suggests that we don't care about Palestinian lives. Really, that's a disgusting accusation.
It is a particularly stupid question, but the most common idiotic message of the weekend was actually parroted all over the legacy media, that somehow there is moral equivalence between Israel releasing terrorists and Hamas releasing children. This is something the legacy media are actively promoting. So let's start with the actual facts. Every single person Hamas is releasing is an innocent person. Every single person Israel is releasing is a criminal. Here is a chart of the Palestinian released prisoners, grouped by their actions. 15% threw stones at Israeli soldiers. 8% were involved in stabbing attacks. 10% were involved in shooting attacks. 6.4% in other violences. Terrorist contact, 11%. Terrorist attempt, 14.4%. 12.4% Molotov cocktails. 10.7% explosives. Only 11% others, but even those people were associated with terrorism. I mean, it's amazing. Okay, so who exactly are these convicts? Again, I don't have to just tell you from the chart. Here's the video of some of these terrorists who were released, what they actually did. Here's one woman. Okay, she was released. She's an innocent woman, right? An innocent woman being held hostage by Israel. Except for she actively stabs this police officer. Watch the tape. She goes after him with a knife. Here's another woman. She's carrying a knife above her head, trying to stab a police officer. Here are two terrorists chasing a police officer with knives. Here is a police officer. Here is a Palestinian just stabbing a random person. There is one of the terrorists literally taking his van, crashing into a police officer, and then trying to stab him. A car attack. Jumps out with a knife. A knife attack. Okay, these are the people that the media are portraying as equivalent to the Israeli hostages being released. Again, these are people who are literally attempting to stab and murder people. That's who is in Israeli prisons. Now, those terrorists who are being released are immediately being greeted with raucous cheering by Hamas supporters, not in the Gaza Strip, in Judea and Samaria, the West Bank. This was tape from Ramallah this weekend. They're literally firing fireworks in celebration at terrorists being released back into their community. Because these are heroes in the Palestinian community. People who attempt to murder Jews. Not just police officers, like random Jews. In fact, how innocent were the people who were released? Well, the released prisoners themselves immediately donned Hamas headgear. And they pledged to renew their terrorist efforts. Again, they literally put on the Hamas headbands and then swore that they would rejoin the fight. These are terrorists wearing Hamas gear. Mass celebration of the release of terrorists. Okay, and here's one of the persons who was released calling for more Jewish blood. Okay, this lady, who is a terrorist, she's saying, "We are the sword of Mohammed Daf." He is the military leader of Hamas. So that's on the one side. Meanwhile, here is some tape of Israeli children being released to their parents. If those parents survived, some of these kids have no parents because Hamas actively murdered them. You can see these are kids being delivered back into the arms of their family after being held hostage for 50 days. Exactly the same. Moral equivalence, according to the media. Exactly the same. This is, cycle of violence and all of that. It's ridiculous and sick to make any sort of equation here. But of course, that's the entire game that the media are playing. Are you tired of the lies and the twist of the mainstream media talking points? Yeah, me too. Join me in my newest series, Fact, where I dismantle and bring truth to this tiring mainstream agenda.